Feminist Macroeconomic Alliance Malawi is today giving a media briefing during this strategic moment. And the moment, as we all hate, is that this is the Global Week of Action for Debt Cancellation to contribute to raising more awareness about debt issues and call for debt cancellation, and also as a way of amplifying the civil society movement voices around issues of fiscal justice as well as public services. As you all know, coronavirus has caused havoc across the country, and Malawi hasn't been spared. People have lost loved ones, communities have lost livelihoods, and we have seen economic, platforms being turned upside down. It is the worst global health crisis in a century and has had very terrible economic consequences. And the poor countries like us have been even hardly hit. Many poor countries have been plunged into new debt crisis levels as they attempt to respond to the threat of the virus while also managing the debts that have skyrocketed. For Malawi, even before Corona, as one of the least developed countries, we already had a debt crisis. So Corona has just complicated the issue. At the moment, Malawi's fiscal deficit continues to widen above the SADC set level of 4% of GDP. The stock of debt for Malawi has astronomically increased nearly 3/4 of the past 5 years, from 2.41 trillion kwacha to the current 4.1 trillion kwacha. That's how much debt we are looking at currently, and that's fine. Previous speakers talked about, I don't think we can talk about seriousness more than that. This is very serious. And as Jesse rightly said, you can talk about creating more jobs, 1 million jobs, providing for our people as a country through health, education, and other services when you have 4.1 trillion to service. That's very serious. And with such an unsustainable high debt, as I've said, Malawi will, in this particular fiscal year, spend more money in debt payment to rich governments than in health care or other health services. If you wanted to know, education has the highest share of the budget. Debt cancellation is second. Hello? Yeah. Yes, it is. And then you have health itself and the other sectors. So that's serious enough for us to start talking about debt cancellation. The national budget, as I'm saying, currently shows that the second largest share, which I've just said, of 17%, is allocated to debt servicing. This situation is pathetic, especially considering the current public health issues of Corona and the other existing health services. And this will force government to take fresh loans to finance COVID interventions, as well as other services that should be provided to our communities. The initial mapping by allies shows that these loans, some of which that we owe, normally come with conditionalities. And this will foster a return to regressive austerity policies and underfunded public services that Emma talked about in the early 2000s. For the past 30 years, international financial institutions like the World Bank and IMF has had significant implications on what Malawi is going through currently. Emma did talk about that earlier. Malawi has seen structural adjustment plans often attached to loans since the 80s, and this has led to liberalization and privatization, particularly harmful to poor members of our society. So the impact is more on the people that we all seek to save, which is the poor rural people. Qualifying for debt relief back then, that Emma referred to in the year 2000, Malawi also saw the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank influencing Malawi's policies. For instance, the country was advised then to minimize their intervention in the maize market and sell off all the grain reserves in that time, which the IMF considered to be too large to justify. And Jesse said, consequently, they regretted, but the damage had been done. Because 2 years later, it was followed by low harvest, and food was scarce, and I don't think most of the young girls remember that we had a huge famine in 2001. And it was basically partly the consequence of what these international financial institutions did wrongly advise us. And we call upon them to unconditionally cancel the debt that we have. The IMF later admitted it was wrong, as I said earlier. These are cases that illustrate lack of responsibility and foresight by these international financial institutions. While suspension of debt payments to bilateral creditors has been offered by the G20 through the end of the year, this merely postpones the problem. I think we have been offered a relief to pay, not to cancel, just a relief to pay for the 6 months. The statement says that doesn't solve it, just postpone the problem. Without debt cancellation, many developing countries, including Malawi, are likely to spend more years enduring reduced capital availability and severely restricted spending on public services, creating yet another lost decade, a phrase the IMF itself is now using to describe the risk of low-income countries. They come and advise, there are mistakes and consequences made, and they are like laughing at us by using this kind of statements. Therefore, multiple crises of the COVID pandemic will continue as a result of these decisions. And to tackle COVID with so much data, as I said earlier, is almost a non-starter. So cancelling debt and conditional, as we speak, as we've been speaking this afternoon, is the fastest way to keep money within these development countries, including Malawi, so that we can increase spending on healthcare, we can increase spending on education, we can provide a safety net to most vulnerable people, and we can finance the rebuilding of our economies. In view of this context, Feminist Microeconomic Alliance Malawi, together with our partners and allies in Malawi and globally, we demand for much more than debt relief. We demand debt justice. Debt justice is an unconditional cancellation of debt as well. Specifically, we call upon world leaders, national governments, financial institutions, public and private, to take an urgent, just, ambitious action in compliance of their obligation and responsibilities, and commit to the following. These are our recommendations this afternoon. And this is what we pledge to those that we owe money to. Number one, unconditional cancellation of debt by all lenders, bilateral or private, for all countries in need for at least the next 4 years, as an immediate step and clear program towards the unconditional cancellation of debt. In addition, borrowing governments, including Malawi, have it within their power to stop making debt payments, but they should not suffer any form of penalties for doing such. We also call upon our government to commit to use of free debt to address immediate needs. Now, this is a call to the current government. In the event that this unconditional cancellation of debt happens, which we are sure it will happen, we seek an indulgence to the current government to make sure that that money that is released is put to good use. It would be very stupid if money, the debt is cancelled and the money is wasted. We also seek a fair, transparent, binding and multilateral framework for debt crisis resolution under the auspices of the UN and not in the lender-dominated arenas. We also, as a recommendation, we seek recognition and application primarily of human rights and the corresponding obligations of the states, the international community, and the private sector, including the extraterritorial responsibility of each state for the impacts of the action or omission of companies, speculators, and investors under its jurisdiction. We also seek repatriation for the damages caused to countries, people, and nature due to the contracting, use, and payment of unsustainable and illegitimate debt and the conditions imposed to guarantee their collection. And finally, we seek a decisive and full solution to the debt problem as part of the profound transformation of economic and financial systems that present crisis to so urgently demanded. So, ladies and gentlemen, debt cancellation should not be a question of mercy or forgiveness. No, and my past speakers also talked about that. It is a question of justice. It is a question of survival. It is a question for Malawi to justify its obligation to public services, especially for the women, especially for the youth, especially for our rural communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Assan Golowa. Education, debt cancellation, and then health. I think